Here is a real pleasure to be here once again with Professor Collier. Thank you very much. It's an honor to have you in Madrid again. As you said, it was 6 years ago that we were here sitting together to present your book on the future of capitalism. I'm afraid, you're 6 years wiser, and I'm 6 years older now. So, and you've been doing, quite of an impressive number of books and publications now. But the one that brings us today here is this Left Behind, Rezagados, in a Spanish book, which I have had the pleasure of reading throughout these days. Just a short disclaimer, the first time I did this, it was on my personal responsibility, but the second time, since Vicente and the Foundation invited me for the second time, I'm totally free of any responsibility because they insist on inviting me to do your book, so I'm totally free to speak. Also, I think I was remember something you told, which I think is a good starting point. You've been used to speak truth to power, and this is something we're very grateful for, because I think it's not only the wisdom and the knowledge that we need in social sciences, but of course the ability to speak truth to power, the ability to try and change things. And maybe I cannot refrain by telling this anecdote about Liz Truss. When she was invited to present your book, she showed up late, right? She said, I'm not going to listen to you, I'm not going to stay afterwards, and I'm going to tell you what I think about the future of capitalism, right? Was this something like that, Professor Collier?
Yeah, she also said she'd never read it and was never going to.
So, contrary to that kind of practice, we are here today to discuss the book. Many of us have read this book, and if not, I'm sure they will read it after this talk.
My book lasted longer than Liz Truss. Liz Truss lasted about a month.
Yeah. Okay. So now one of the things that we saw in that book when we discuss it here, and that has now, of course, deepened in your writing, is your attempt to bring economic science under, I would say, the control or the supervision of something which is larger and more important, which is a moral vision of society. The idea that the economy and economic science has to be at the service of community and the people. And this is a long turn and a strong drive in your work, which here again, is present all over the book. Could we start maybe there, with your criticism of the standard economy, and how at some point you say something such as that Homo economicus is a sociopath, something like that, that you write literally in the book?
Unfortunately, he is. Homo economicus, this is the term used in economics to describe the economic vision of a person, and if you met Homo economicus, you wouldn't trust him with your wallet, you wouldn't trust him with anything, because he's completely devoid of any moral values at all. He is greedy, he is selfish, and we know such people. They exist in a very small minority, and they are indeed called sociopaths. And that was the working model in economics for many, many years. It's built into all the standard models of economic behavior. They're ticking away to explain behavior is Homo economicus. And of course, we all can recognize people like that. But they're very rare. We can even measure how rare. They're about 3% of the human population. We even know now why they are about 3% of the human population around the world. And that is because the fierce heat of evolutionary selection, when human beings came down from the trees, had to learn how to stand on two legs, we were very weak. We weren't fast compared with a tiger. We weren't strong. We hadn't got great big furry tusks. We were defenseless. And most human groupings died out as a result. We slimmed down to a very small group of human communities that became communities, and their strengths, they had two great strengths that enabled them to survive. One is they learned how to cooperate together, to trust each other in a community, to work to support each other. And the other thing they learned to do was to learn from each other. We've expanded that theory, and it's now how learning travels within network groups. Humans are infinitely better than any other mammal at rapid learning. And you can measure it in 3-year-olds. It already sets in at 3, before the age of rational thought. If you give 3-year-olds a puzzle and put some 3-year-old chimps, the 3-year-old humans are no better than the 3-year-old chimps. But the big difference is the 3-year-old humans, once one has learnt, they will copy it. Very, very fast learning across a network group. The chimps don't do that. An individual chimp is just as likely to hit a solution, put round pegs in round holes and triangular pegs in triangular holes. They're just as smart as 3-year-old kids. So it's not brain power. We call ourselves Homo sapiens sapiens. That's just flattering rubbish, right? But what we're really good at is cooperating and rapid learning. Now that turns out, in a larger context, the world now, to be massively useful, because we're facing a world of desperate uncertainties, where the right answer very often to what should we do now is, we don't know. And when we face such problems, the right answer is learn rapidly, and we need structures which encourage that rapid learning. Sorry, I'm getting over-enthusiastic too soon, but yes, we now know a lot about evolution, and it tells us humans are a very unusual species, and we understand why we're so successful, which we are.
And then one of the things that runs also across all the cases of success and failure throughout your books, in places from Botswana to Britain, from Singapore to Colombia, is social capital. Is the capital, which for you and for many others is absolutely essential. It's like the air we breathe, but we still are not able to formalize, measure in a sense, or very rudimentary. What is it, social capital? Why is it so important, and why does it occupy such a kind of a marginal place in sometimes our thinking about the world, reforms, and the future?
Well, the great scholar of social capital is a very eminent Harvard professor, Robert Putnam, and I'm proud to say he's endorsed my work, sort of stuff, but he supported it. But his big work was on Italy, initially on Italy, and to understand why the north of Italy was so much more successful than the south, and continues to be, even though they've been united in a single country for well over a century. And the answer was that in the north of Italy, the people learned how to cooperate across different families. So instead of just being family networks, they learned to come together in the cities, the independent cities of northern Italy. And his institution, which he most celebrated, was the institution of the choir, where people come together to sing. And by doing so, they learn how to cooperate across different tribal groups. You don't have to be in the family of the Colliers to be able to sing together. You just have to be able to sing in harmony with other people. And the direct benefit from that is very modest. It's just a nice sound. But the indirect benefit is that you're forming habits of association which bring people together across the previous family clan base. And that built these habits of association, which then became the bedrock of Northern Italy's strength. And it's persisted even, nearly 2 centuries after unification of Italy. So that was the big idea. And then, to be fair to Robert, he's now quantified this in his latest, probably his last book, called The Upswing. And The Upswing is a real tease. I'm sure it's in Spanish, and it's well worth reading. And it starts with an analysis which seems to describe America perfectly well in the 2020s. And you think, yes, Robert, that's indeed just what America like in the 2020s. It's really pretty horrid, isn't it? But actually, Robert, we do know because actually other people have written about this. And then at the end of the chapter, he says, I'm describing America in the year 1900, not 2020, right? And that's the shock, that America in 1900 was as vicious and selfish as America in 2020. But what he quantifies is an U-shape in which, an inverted U-shape, in which America comes together from being a me society in 1900 to being a we society by the 1960s. That coming together. And he measures it by a very simple technique. He does some very fancy stuff as well, but the simple one is just the frequency of me versus we in public discourse. And this simple measure of how many times are people saying we and how many times are people saying me describes this coming together between 1900 and the 1960s, and then the falling apart again between the 1960s and 2000, when it's back to about where it was, and then social media comes in about 2010, and there's a cliff edge, and the me society spirals up as never before. Zuckerberg and all the Facebook people thought that they were bringing people together to be we together. And my God, what they brought together was the vicious jungle that is social media and that tyrannizes our teenagers. I've got 2 of them, I know, right? Robert Putnam, great book. He's quantified it now.
And that's, I think, a perfect segue also to the next theme that of course runs across your work, which is inequality. I remember, the first book I read of yours was The Bottom Billion. So you've moved now from looking into the bottom billion to basically whoever is at the bottom in also advanced societies, and more particularly all the time in your life from Oxford and the Blattadmy School that you've been looking to the world, but in your backyard, in your garden, in your own country.
Yes.
Inequalities were mounting and growing to an extent which the figures that you give in the book are staggering for an advanced economy. Could you tell us a bit, how is this coming to terms with the fact that kind of sort of on your watch while you're looking abroad, then you look at Britain and you see degrees of inequality which are staggering?
Yes, I'm afraid it is. And for me, it's a tragedy. My hometown, where I grew up, Sheffield, it's a home city. It's one of the biggest cities in the country. It's 500,000 people. When I grew up in Sheffield, and I should say I was first generation I was very lucky. I was born in a long time ago, 1949, I was the first generation. My parents had both left school when they were 12. So my parents had no education at all. And I was an only child. So I essentially grew up with stories of the 1930s. So I belonged in the past. But my parents had naively thought that the new world of the late 1940s was a world of equal opportunity. Suddenly, health services were free, education was free, and so they very naively believed, yes, we were suddenly a land of equal opportunities. I remember my mother explaining to me at 5 that there's Oxford and there's Cambridge, Paul, and you'll have to decide which one to go to. Right? 5, with parents who'd left school at 12. My dad was a pork butcher, my mum a shop assistant, right? They were innocents. They didn't understand how stacked the opportunities were in that time. But thank goodness they didn't, because I still have this image of myself, aged 5, thinking, well, they say Oxford and Cambridge, so I assume Oxford's a bit better. And I think they're right. So that was me then. And then I got to school. I passed an exam and got to it. There was one top school and I got to it. It turned out I was good at exams. And then at that school, I remember my English teacher when I was 12, and I had to read out a passage. And he stopped me and he said, no, Collier, no, you said that in dialect.
Wow.
You can't say that. No, that's all wrong. You've got to speak in proper English. I still remember that because it stunned me that the language I was speaking at home, for some reason, wasn't proper English. And I still remember that moment of feeling shocked. How could my parents' language, my home tongue, not be proper? Now, as I've indicated, if you picked it up, my school teacher spoke with a strong Yorkshire accent. It wasn't dialect, but it was Yorkshire accent. And so I earnestly learned how to speak just with a Yorkshire accent, but with proper English. And then I got to Oxford. Oh my God, right? Oxford didn't speak with a Yorkshire accent. To the Southern English ear, a Yorkshire accent sounds comic. And so when I got to Oxford, people assumed I was an idiot. And so gradually, over the last 50 years of being in Oxford, I've learned how to speak properly. So I'm on my 3rd language, and it's still English.
Yeah. I felt the same when I went to Sheffield. I felt like an idiot because nobody could understand me.
They wouldn't know. That's right. You learned the wrong language. Anyway, so joking apart, in my day, not many people like me made it from Sheffield to an Oxford education. Now, many fewer make it with that same background. The chances of social mobility have massively fallen in England. Going to university is no longer free. And of course, what we've got now has been a long period of social assortative mating, which is a fancy way of saying that a lot of people go to university where they marry. And now in Britain, it matters not just did you go to university, but which university? Which university? there's testimony from a permanent secretary, the highest level in the civil service, a permanent secretary who said, yes, I went to a good English public private school, and then I went to a very good English university, but not Oxford or Cambridge. And then I rose in the civil service and became a permanent secretary. But I feel a complete outsider because I didn't go to either Oxford or Cambridge. Right? And he testified that. You know, and this is astonishing. This is a guy who reached the top of the civil service, but felt an outsider even when he was at the top of the civil service. Right? This is a shocking environment in which chances are so heavily skewed against ordinary people. So that is the bitter reality now.
And you do some numbers which are incredible in terms of those who are in risk of inclusion or inequality in the UK, contrary to what people would feel, that is probably ethnic minorities in London or in big cities are actually, you use this example of who is Miss Disgrace, the most unfortunate person in Britain today would be a woman in her middle ages coming from a rural area rather than someone from an ethnic minority, even immigrant. Is that, how can you explain that? I mean, please tell us a bit about that.
We've done much further work since the book, but it's all confirming that general point. And the truly failing places in Britain are now the provincial cities, the regional cities. We've got 10 regional cities that in total come up to about 8 and a bit million people. It's exactly the same size as London, 8 and a bit million. But the opportunities, if you grow up in London, are vastly superior to the opportunities if you grow up in these provincial cities. Your chances of good educational performance are much higher. Partly you've got role models. Your chances of being able to start a business and grow it are much, much better because there's a lot of local finance in London. There's no local finance worth speaking of for small businesses in the provincial cities. The whole network of support, the mentoring, the role models are missing in a lot of the provincial cities now. Sheffield, with 500,000 people, doesn't have any of the big 4 accountancy firms, doesn't have any of the big law firms. So the basic support services, which in London are taken for granted and which are very valuable for learning how to grow a business, are just missing. And so it's much less encouraging to try. And this is a tragedy. We've got very good universities around the country. That's one of our great strengths. We've got 18 of the top 100 universities in the world. But the provincial universities are starved of money, whereas Oxford and Cambridge are showered with money. My own Blavatnik school, thanks to Mr. Blavatnik, who gave £75 million to Oxford to build the finest building imaginable, which is where my office is. And indeed, if 75 million, you can build something very, very fine, because money is no object. So you get the top architects and you tell them what you want and they produce it. Just this month, opening right next to the Blavatnik School is the Schwarzman Center. Mr. Schwarzman, another billionaire financier, has doubled the donation that the Oxford got for the Blavatnik School. So Mr. Schwarzman has given 150 million for a magnificent building, with a great 500-seat auditorium. It's a celebration of privileged. So this is the biggest donations to Sheffield University, 5 million. Why is it that nobody steps up and makes a major donation to Sheffield University? In engineering, it's one of the top 4 or 5 universities in the world. They've just had to make their top professor of engineering redundant because Sheffield University is so short of money that they have to make their most expensive people redundant. So we've got a tragedy going on in the cities of the north of England. And I'm living in paradise.
Which brings me to something which is, of course, very important also in your work, which is the role of the state and mobilization of public investment, both in terms of the territorial structure of the country. You dedicate quite strong words to the Treasury in in Britain. I don't think they invite you very often to talk to them, right? But why is it, that in Britain you see that the failure of the system is particularly to be blamed on the failure of the Treasury and the role of the state in the way they understand and they plan for the country?
Britain has a uniquely dysfunctional structure, and this is why Britain is interesting. It's a warning of do not go this route. Right, unfortunately, right? We are unique in pretty well the whole of the Western world in not having a Ministry of Economy. So we don't have an economics ministry. We only have a Ministry of Finance. Right? So there's no Minister of the Economy. What's the difference between a Minister of Economy and a Minister of Finance? A Minister of Finance does the annual budget. That's their core task, set the annual budget. A Minister of Economy should be planning for a 5 or 10-year horizon of what will be how do we build a better future? And we don't have one. So nowhere in British government is there anybody who thinks more than a year ahead. I mean, this is madness. So we've got a very short-termist Treasury with total control, and it's very like a monastery in the sense that people go in when they're very young and never come out, and nobody else goes in. And it sounds comic. It would be comic, except that it's catastrophic. Very clever people go in. I know, I teach them. Right? They've got to do really well on the Oxford graduate economics program. And then, if they're clever enough, whoosh, they go fast track. Their first job, age 23, 24, is in the Treasury. And then they're given a task. Run the bus services in Sheffield. Right? Why should they run the bus services in Sheffield? Well, we can't trust the Sheffield local government because it's no skills. No skills, unlike the Treasury. Right? That would be less tragic if this 24-year-old knew anything about Sheffield and so had some sense of what bus routes in Sheffield look like. But he doesn't have. Yeah? It gets worse. You won't hopefully have heard of HS2.
What's that?
HS2 is Britain's HS stands for high speed rail network. It was called High Speed 2 to distinguish it from High Speed 1, which was the Eurotunnel, which of course is built and run by the French. So that's High Speed 1. So there was HS2 is a network that was going to cover the whole country. High-speed trains everywhere. It might just about have made sense if they'd actually been able to do it. But again, I know the guy who's responsible for HS2. He was very clever, very clever. Does he know anything about railways? Nothing. Right? I contrast it with France. France, where I taught at one of the Grandes Écoles for 12 years. There's a series of Grandes Écoles, each teaching a specialism. And so the French civil servant, by the time he's gone to the right Grande École, he's got a lot of expertise. And that's why if you've ever traveled in France, the French rail system really works. It is very fast, very effective. They know how to build and deliver railways. The British civil service doesn't. And so HS2, High Speed 2, which was this network across the country, gradually got more and more expensive, more and more over budget. It's now estimated to cost something over 100 billion, probably a lot over 100 billion. It's estimated it will only be completed by about 2040, which is still 15 years away. And when it's completed, it will only run from Birmingham to one station in outer London called Royal Oak. Not many people want to go from Birmingham to Royal Oak or from Royal Oak to Birmingham. It gets worse. They've now discovered that it won't be able to run at high speed. So it will be slow speed 23, but it does get worse than that because in the process of building it, anybody who wants to go further than Birmingham on this slow high-speed train will have to go much slower. And so all the services north of Birmingham will be slower and less frequent and more crowded because they're smaller trains. So this is so comically, spectacularly disastrous. Who's achieved this? The Treasury, which is worried about low skills in Birmingham, in Sheffield, to run a bus service. So it's so comically painful. You imagine I'm making this up or exaggerating. I'm afraid I'm not. Every statement there is true. In fact, every statement is probably an understatement. So we've got a weirdly centralized, overconfident, underskilled civil service that is micromanaging everything. This cannot possibly work and doesn't work. That's why people have now mutinied. So we've got a Labour government with a huge majority in Parliament, which it achieved, thanks to our weird voting system, it achieved that on only 33% of the vote. So it's got a vast majority in Parliament on 33% of the vote, which is itself a bit odd. But now, only 15 months after it came to power, it's polling at 11% in the latest opinion polls. So it's fallen from 33% to 11%, but it's got this huge majority in Parliament. Meanwhile, by far the most successful party is a completely new party called Reform, which is, I think, standing at 36% now in the polls. And Reform is led by a completely untested maverick person. And his only claim to fame is that he promises things will be much better. Will they be much better with him? We've no reason to think that they will, but he's offering hope. And he's able to very effectively criticize the incompetence of the present system. So what's better than that? And what I advocate is we've got to have a strategy which offers credible hope. There'll always be mavericks, like Mr. Trump in America or Mr. Farage in Britain, who are offering incredible hope. And the only way we immunize ourselves against that incredible hope is if we offer credible hope. And that's what I try to set out in the book, Pathways Towards Credible Hope.
Let's turn to that, because I mean, you deal at great length with the things that are in common in place which are left behind, and you explain some of them is inefficient bureaucracies, there's a lack of social trust and social capital, maybe wrong economic decisions, even divisions in society. But and that's the downward spiral that you describe in the book. But when you move to trying to see how this ascendant or spiral works, how do places get out of the crisis? What are kind of the single most important lessons that you see there? Because you cover in the book, and this is fascinating, everything from Botswana to Colombia or to Singapore, to even to German, to East Germany,
Yeah,
so
completely.
It is not a question of north, south, east, west, ethnic development. At every stage of development, you can go down, and at every stage of development, you can move up, right? So there's a bit of hope there in saying that nothing is predetermining you to fail or to succeed, right? So what is the magic sauce from leaving poverty or fixing this situation?
I'll give you two components of it, right? So one component is to bring people together around common purposes, building some social glue with attractive common purposes that people can buy into. Finding those common purposes and communicating them with simple narratives that people can understand, that is the art of a good political leader. So bringing people together around a common purpose. The other component of the secret sauce is to learn rapidly what seems to work in the present context. We are at the moment living in an environment where the honest answer to what should we do is very often we don't know. Okay? We've got wild cards. President Trump, who comes up with new things each day. One gets the sense that President Trump doesn't know what he's going to do tomorrow, let alone anybody else. It'll be determined by what he's on social media tomorrow morning, right? So we're in an environment which is very hard to predict. And so prediction is the wrong thing to worry about. Mm-hmm. It's to say, how do we work out what looks as if it will work here in this context for the present? And that is the concept of rapid learning. And we know a lot about how to learn rapidly. The answer is you do so by devolved experiments. My hero in all this, very unlikely hero, is Deng Xiaoping, a Chinese leader, right? Leader of the Chinese Communist Party. I bet it's the first time he's been celebrated in this scene, but for good reason is he being celebrated, because he had inherited this highly centralized, crazy system from Mao Zedong. Utterly centralized. I, Mao Zedong, know best. You all follow my brilliant ideas. Right? That was how he killed 60 million people, right? With something called the Great Leap Forward, which was a great leap backwards. Right? That was centralized power over confidence in action. And Deng switched the model completely, 180 degrees. He said, we're going to devolve power to the regions. We're going to select very clever people who've passed a highly technocratic exam, so we'll get very smart young people. We'll send them to be governors of provinces or head of special economic zones. They'll be there for 5 years, and then we'll tell them what they've got to achieve. And there's always an economic objective. You've got to double the income of your region in 5 years. Then there's a social objective. You've got to halve infant mortality in the next 5 years. And then the vital step. We in the Politburo have no idea how to do it. We don't know best. We've no idea. That's why we're sending you out. You try and figure something out and try something. We will penalize you. We'll be watching you. We will penalize you if in 6 months' time you haven't started an initiative to try and double your region's GDP and an initiative to halve infant mortality. So the good news is you're assembled here. You're the top 40 people in China. You've come out of an exam that tested 20 million people, and you're the top. Well done, right? Just think how you feel. And then you're told you're going to go to the governor of the region with full plenipotentiary powers from Ni Deng. Right? Your word will be God in this region. But you've got to achieve these two things, and we've no idea how to do it. And if you haven't tried something in the first 6 months, you're thrown out. Right? And we'll never get back. What are you going to do? Well, maybe there's 1 or 2 idiots who say, I'm very clever, I'll figure it out. They obviously fail, right? But most people, if they have any sense at all, and they're in a region where they know nothing, they've got to plan the bus service in Sheffield, as it were, they're going to go and ask people. If you want to double GDP in your region, who would you ask? The business community. You'd say, what's constraining the business community here? If you've got to halve infant mortality, where would you go? Hospitals, funeral directors, anything. And you say, why is infant mortality so high? What would be your ideas to lower it? And you go to several hospitals and they each suggest something different. And you say, do it in that hospital, do that in that hospital. They're watching you to make sure that you've done something. You're watching them. And at each level, what Deng is doing is saying, aha, what you're doing on infant mortality really seems to be working. What you're doing on infant mortality doesn't. You go and have a look. I don't know. Maybe sitting at this end is very different from sitting that end. You go and have a look. That's all I ask. If you don't think it'll work for you, don't do it. It's your judgment. But I suggest you go and talk, right? And he does that. And that's happening within the region. It's happening between the regions. That is rapid learning in action. And that's the process he put in place. And it survived for 8 periods of 5 years. That 40-year period saw the biggest reduction in human poverty ever witnessed in 5,000 years of civilization. Right? So that's why I celebrate him. Tell me, am I forgiven?
But Professor, it's true also that now it has become an example of capital misallocation. I mean, China, but also the lack of civil and social rights. Can you show us an example which works also with democracy and a bit more of a private initiative that you admire? Because few people emigrate to China, actually, right? It's not a Chinese dream from others, maybe for the Chinese.
Quite right. You're quite right. And so the good news in Left Behind is that actually I think democracies are likely to be more successful than autocracies. And of course, Deng Xiaoping was replaced by President Xi, who is a great centralizer. And Xi's idea was, we're back to I know best. I teach a class for Chinese business leaders every year. And in 2024, I taught the class about this. They know nothing about how Deng worked, but they did say, we are all children of Deng Xiaoping. We didn't know the details of what he did, but we know that we are here thanks to him. He created an environment in which small business could thrive. This year, instead of there being 50 people in the room, there were only 16. And they were scared out of their minds. They didn't dare say anything that was critical of President Xi. Why? Because what is President Xi doing? If you remember, he's jailing business leaders. He's saying, you are first and foremost a member of the Communist Party, and you've got to follow the interests of the Communist Party. That, I think, will be disastrous for China. So I don't predict a glorious economic future for China, because it's back to this centralized system. And that is the vulnerability with all autocratic systems. They're periodically captured by people who are far too controlling and terrifying. Yeah. And that doesn't work very well.
Unfortunately, we don't have to go that far as to China to find something that works. In your book, you mentioned Mondragon as one of the places which is compatible with social rights and democracy. Could you tell us a bit what is it in Mondragon that caught your eye, and what do you think this is a model that you would want to be replicated, or at least cherished and celebrated here?
It's not the only model, but it's a model that certainly worked in the Basque region. The Basque region, of course, had a tradition of Basque separatism, but that was a disaster. If we just go through Basque history of the last 85 years, most of it is pretty ghastly. It started in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, when, like much of Spain, the Basque region was wrecked by the aftermath of the Civil War. And Franco came in. The Basque region then entered an even worse phase, where there were three groups within the Basque region. One group which wanted violent secession. Another group which wanted peaceful secession. And a third group which wanted to stay in Spain. And the violent secessionists started to murder the leaders of the other two groups. The young people here won't remember that, but the older people here will remember it. I remember it, right? So that was part of the tragedy. And then in the 1970s, a further tragedy happened, which was the Basque region had been the heart of heavy industry, the traditional heavy industries, steel and such like. And those industries, as in much of the rest of Europe, collapsed. And so you got mass unemployment as people lost their jobs. And that triggered a whole chain of social breakdown. So by the 1970s, the Basque region was a tragic place of violence within the region, of industrial decay. This was terrible. But alongside all that had been this bottom-up social movement led by a priest, Father Jose, who'd started his work as a young priest in 1941 in a small Basque town. And he'd spent 14 years training a small group of people in the techniques of creating new businesses, but being pro-social. And it took him 14 years to get 5 people who he trusted. You 5, right? And then he said, after 14 years, right, you're ready. You know as well as I do how to create a business that is pro-social but innovative. Go away and do it. And so the founding group of 5 became a team known by their first initials. Yeah? That was the birth of Mondragon. And they found businesses, they spin them out, but always with this philosophy that your duty, once you've got a successful business, is to spin out, create another business group, but with this philosophy of cooperation and helping the poorest people in the society.
And salaries would be capped.
And always a cap on the salaries. The poor are in the firm are paid more than the going wage. The top people in the firm are paid less than a chief executive would normally get. The maximum spread is 5-1 between the best paid person in the Mondragon group and the worst paid person, 5-1. In the American business world of chief executives, in the finance world, the spread is something like between 300-1 and 500-1. Right? So that's the difference between a divisive world of American high finance and the pro-social world of Mondragon. Now, you don't have to be as pro-social as Mondragon, but this gradually grew a network which now employs 90,000 people. It's the biggest company in the Basque region. It's, I think, the 6th biggest company in the whole of Spain. So it's a very serious sized company, and it's very innovative, very successful. And its triumphant moment came in 1994 when the Guggenheim announced that it wanted to create a center somewhere in Europe. And it basically put that up for bid and said, we'll go to wherever offers the best, most attractive setting. Right? And because of the habits of social cooperation, how many people know this story? I don't want to bore you with it. Hands up if you know.
They know the story about the Guggenheim.
Okay, so Mondragon has created this social capital, and so very quickly the towns and communities all around the Basque region come together and say, we've got to agree on one place. There can only be one place. We don't mind which place, which is the place that's most suited for a Guggenheim museum. And it turned out it was Bilbao. Bilbao was an industrial train wreck with a great coastal area that had been one of these wrecked industrial sites. So they said, you can have that site for free. We'll guarantee planning permission for whatever you build there. And then every town in the Basque region said, we'll contribute to pay for the building of that place in the Basque region. We'll contribute. They very rapidly collected 100 million euro. So they went to the Guggenheim and said, here is 100 million euro. Here is a magnificent site you have for free by the sea. You, Guggenheim, can choose the architect of your choice, and there's the 100 million to pay for it. Oxford would have been a more natural site for the Guggenheim. It's one of the great tourist cities of Europe. Or Amsterdam, right? Or Paris. Bilbao, right? Oxford had no power to come together around anything. You know what Oxford was already like. The Dutch were doing their own thing. We don't need Guggenheim. We've got Rubens, we've got Rembrandt, bloody hell. I mean, we don't need anything more. And so Guggenheim looked, and this was the winning bid. I first heard about this when I was the head of research at the World Bank, 1977. And we had a president called President Wolfenson. And President Wolfenson suddenly decided that it was a vital matter of state that he personally should visit Spain. And whilst in Spain, it was a vital matter of the world interest that he should go to Bilbao, which he did. And I remember us scratching our heads and thinking, why does he want to go to Bilbao? The Guggenheim Museum. It was already getting world famous because it had this magnificent architecture. If you have not yet been, I was there in April, and it is superb. Right? Okay.
So, we have a good number of questions for the public, and I want to bring them in. Just one last question, and I know this, and I will ask you to be brief so people can have an idea. Because people have heard about distributive justice. But you introduced something here, which is contributive justice. Could you briefly tell the difference, and then we move to the Q&A?
Yeah, so contributive justice is the concept of the moral philosopher, the Harvard moral philosopher Michael Sandel. I was returned to my room at 4 o'clock today, and there, my first email was from Michael Sandel saying, I want to come to Oxford to join your celebration of your pre-retirement event, and I also want to join with you. I'm now working in the Oxford Centre for Islamic Studies, and I'm joining them because I want to build bridges between Islam and Christianity. And I want to look at the early origins of Christianity, the concept of the duties of wealth, which St. Augustine of Hippo pioneered, and similarly in the early evolution of Islam, which conjured up this duty not to live on unearned income, risk-free unearned income, and the similarities between them. So I'm planning to build a series on the duties of the wealthy, the duties of wealth. And Michael Sandel is delighted to come and join that. So Michael Sandel's concept of contributive justice is asking, under what circumstances do we have a duty, a moral duty, to contribute to the whole? And he says it's conditioned upon three things. One is there has to be equality of voice. Voice what for? Voice in setting common purposes. Second, there has to be equality of respect. Are the voices of the left behind communities heard with equal respect to the voices of the successful? And thirdly, are the left behind communities in a material position to contribute financially? As long as all three of those are met, then there is a moral duty on the communities that have been left behind to contribute to the whole. If those conditions are not met, then they become the first order of activity in establishing the next task of common purpose. You can't get to any further common purpose until you build those conditions. Right? So, have I got time for one last example? We return to Sheffield, my hometown. And we return to Sheffield for the founding of Sheffield University. Now one of the top 100 research universities, you've heard, they're just making their top professor of engineering redundant, right? Because they've run out of money. They didn't run out of money in 1904. In 1904, there was an appeal to create Sheffield University. And it was an alliance between the working class, the workers, the unions, and the steel baron, Mr. Firth, who owned the biggest steel company. And this was the deal. Mr. Firth said, I will match, pound for pound, any money contributed by the steel workers. And the steel unions went to their workers and said, it's your moral duty as citizens of Sheffield to contribute to finance this this future university. You haven't had any education. They were like my parents. But the future of this city depends on education. And your children and your grandchildren will benefit from a university. That was forward-looking, and so every steel worker voluntarily contributed a week's wages, which is quite a lot of money, right? A week's wages. They could do that because Firth paid them decent wages, and so they were in a position to contribute, and they chose to contribute. They were forward-looking, they wanted a city of the future, and for many years they got one. That is contributive justice in action, an alliance between the workers and the business community to build a better future for the people in the community.
Makes sense.
And that seems to me to be a pretty fair thing. So that's why I'm a great fan of Michael Sandel, who's just won the McGruan Prize, the top prize in moral philosophy.